Good afternoon, Facebook friends and YouTube followers. This is Rich again, back for your second video blog of the day for Friday, August 29, 2014, around 6:05 in the evening. Some news to report: the 2014-2015 hockey news NHL preview yearbooks out, and they are predicting a Chicago Blackhawks versus Tampa Bay Lightning Stanley Cup Final for 2015, and they predict the Chicago Blackhawks will win their third Stanley Cup in 6 years. It's too early to say who's going to win the Stanley Cup, but I think Chicago's probably one of the odds-on favorites, along with Anaheim, LA Canes, maybe St. Louis Blues. Don't forget, in the East, Boston Bruins, Montreal Canadiens, New York Rangers, Pittsburgh Penguins, and I think a dark horse candidate this year to make some noise in the NHL this year is Columbus Blue Jackets. Just keep that in mind. And that's about it for the news. My next subject is my personality profile of the day, and this personality profile is former professional wrestling announcer Tony Schiavone. Tony Schiavone was a professional wrestling announcer for close to 20 years, and he made the transition from doing sports entertainment to doing real professional sports and stuff like that. Tony Schiavone's real name is Noah Anthony Schiavone. He grew up in Virginia, a big professional wrestling fan. He used to travel to a lot of the big-time house shows for Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling when he was a kid. And he went to college at James Madison University, and he called play-by-play for the women's basketball team at James Madison University. After graduating from college, he worked in the southeast part in the United States, calling radio play-by-play and television play-by-play of high school football and basketball games throughout the southeast part of the United States. For 5 years, Tony called minor league baseball in the Mid-Atlantic area, mainly for Charlotte, the Charlotte O's, which was partially owned by Jim Crockett Promotions, which Jim Crockett Promotions runs Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling back in the day. In 1983, Tony made his pro wrestling debut as an announcer, as a ring announcer for the ring matches, and he was an interviewer for Jim Crockett Promotions for Starrcade 1983 and on like the worldwide program as an interviewer. By the end of 1984, he was the main play-by-play announcer for Worldwide Wrestling, and in like April of 1985, Tony Schiavone became the play-by-play voice of World Championship Wrestling Saturday night program on Superstation WTBS, as like Jim Crockett bought that airtime from Vince McMahon. For the next 4 years, Tony Schiavone was the #1 play-by-play announcer for Jim Crockett Promotions Mid-Atlantic, which evolved into the major NWA promotion in the late 80s. He called all the Starrcades. He also called a lot of like Great American Bash and the Clash of Champions and stuff like that. Some of his color partners he worked with during his stint with like Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling and the NWA were Bob Caudle, David Crockett, and Jim Ross. In 1989, Tony Schiavone left the NWA to work for the WWE, and he worked for the WWE approximately 1 year. He conducted some interviews at WrestleMania 5. Around the summer of 1989, he became the play-by-play voice of WWE Wrestling Challenge. He and Gorilla Monsoon were the announce team for Wrestling Challenge for about 9 months. Also, Tony Schiavone called SummerSlam 1989 and Royal Rumble 1990 with Jesse the Body Ventura. And in the spring of 1990, Tony Schiavone left the WWE to go back to the NWA, which became WCW, and he worked on the Worldwide Wrestling program. He really wanted But in a couple of months later, he really wanted to come back to the WWE because he didn't like some of the people who were producing him on Worldwide, the director. He didn't like the director, so he called up Vince McMahon saying, I want my old job back. But Vince McMahon says, you have 5 young children. You don't want to move them back to Connecticut and just stay where you're at. Was a good move because Tony Schiavone did some of the pay-per-views and Clash of Champions with Jim Ross in 1990 and 1991. By 1993, when Jim Ross left WCW to go to the WWE, Tony Schiavone became the primary play-by-play announcer for WCW for the rest of his existence. He called every major pay-per-view. He was the lead announcer for WCW Saturday Night, WCW Worldwide, Monday Nitro, and WCW Thunder. And he also was one of the producers of WCW television as well. So he had a lot of roles to fill within WCW. And some of his famous quotes, Tony Schiavone, was, "This is the greatest night in the history of our sport." He said that too much, especially during the height of the Monday Night Wars and the pay-per-views, that some of these pay-per-views were absolutely stinkers. And his infamous quote happened on January 4th, 1999, on WCW Monday Nitro. He says, whatever you do, please don't change the channel, because I hear our competition has a wrestler who used to wrestle as Cactus Jack's going to win their world title. That will put butts in his seat. What Tony Schiavone did that night, he had the other viewers, the viewers who were watching Nitro, they turned it to Monday Night Raw to see Mick Foley win the WWE Championship. And that quote, gave WWE a victory over WCW in the Monday Night Wars. So that backfired on Tony Schiavone. But it was an idea that Eric Bischoff told him to do, because Raw was taped back then. Every other week. And Nitro was live all the time, except maybe a couple were taped in advance for one reason or another. And by 2001, Tony Schiavone left the world of professional wrestling when WCW was bought out by WWE, and he went back to become a sports announcer, and he became a sports anchor for WSBAM in Atlanta, Georgia. Since 2001, he's worked the pre and post game shows of the Atlanta Braves radio network for a few years. Since 2010, he's a play-by-play announcer of the Gwinnett Braves of the Atlanta Braves affiliate, and he hosts the Georgia football radio show on the Georgia Football Radio Network. And a couple of times Tony came back to wrestling in cameo appearance. In 2001, he came back to call the ill-fated XWF with Jerry the King Lawler, but that was just a pilot for a potential new wrestling program that never lasted. And also in 2003, he made an appearance in TNA as a heel announcer, and one of the segments he had a work shoot with Mike Tenay, one of his broadcast colleagues for WCW. It was a good work shoot, and Tony had dyed blonde hair and stuff, and he had a goatee. He only made one more appearance in a tape segment, and that was about it for the world of wrestling for Tony Schiavone. There was rumors in 2005 he was going to come back to do play-by-play for Monday Night Raw when good old JR had to leave for a while because he had colon surgery, but I heard something they couldn't get the deal done, and I heard this was a rumor that Tony Schiavone was supposed to be a heel announcer, and with helping with brought in by Vince McMahon, and it would have been something on the storyline, and it would have been eventually Jim Ross coming back, and Jim Ross wrestling Tony Schiavone in a match at WrestleMania like 22. If JR won, he returned to his desk. If Tony won, JR would have been fired. The storyline, but that never came to be. I heard something that if that was a rumor or not, but I heard Tony turned it down because he was comfortable working in Atlanta at WSB, and he did not want to give up that job for something like that. But you know, he's probably one of the most successful wrestling announcers of all time, Tony Schiavone and stuff like that. He's a great guy, and that's about it for him. My third and final video subject of the night is about GSN, the Game Show Network. It's a cable channel devoted to game shows. I'll tell you the history about it tonight. See you later, Facebook friends and YouTube followers.